Welcome to this explainer. Listen, if you're gearing up for your Year 8 history exams, you have landed in the exact right spot. Today, we're cracking open one of the biggest, most fascinating mysteries of the medieval world, the hidden motivations behind the First Crusade. We're going to really dig into the primary sources to figure out exactly what drove thousands and thousands of people to make a truly shocking decision. Really stop and think about this for a second. Why would everyday medieval people, we're talking farmers, knights, even the poorest peasants, just pack up and leave their homes? They left their families, their farms, literally the only lives they had ever known, to walk thousands of miles across incredibly dangerous terrain just to fight a war in the Holy Land. It wasn't like just hopping on a quick flight today. This was a brutal, grueling journey. Most of them knew they would probably never make it back. So what was the magnetic pole? Why do it? Okay, so here's our game plan for today's revision session. We'll kick things off with a call to crusade and a deep dive into Pope Urban's speech. Then we'll break down the three main motivations: religion, wealth, and power. Finally, we'll weigh them up to decide what was actually the most significant factor. All right, part one, the call to crusade. Before we jump into judging the primary source evidence, we have to get our bearings and understand the world of 1095. Context is literally everything in history. Let's start with the absolute basics. A crusade, at least as defined in our source material, was a war for the Holy Land between Muslims and Christians during the medieval period. And we need to be clear here, this wasn't just some standard political border dispute over a few miles of farmland. Not at all. It was a massive, bloody conflict rooted in the control of territory that both sides believed was incredibly sacred. And the guy who kicked this whole giant thing off? The Pope. Now, as the leader of the Catholic Church, you really have to remember that in the medieval world, his authority was absolute. He wasn't just a friendly religious figurehead who gave sermons. No, his words held the raw power to mobilize massive armies across entire continents. When he spoke, everybody listened. Now, a quick heads up about the language you'll see. When reading these old historical sources, you're going to encounter terms like Saracens and infidel. Our source notes that Saracens was basically a medieval term used for Muslims, and infidel was a pretty harsh, unfriendly word used to describe anyone who didn't believe in your specific religion. Now, obviously, as historians, we don't use these terms today, but we do have to read them neutrally, just so we can fully grasp the intense, fiery rhetoric that was being used to persuade people to go to war. Moving on to part two, decoding Pope Urban's speech. Let's put our historical detective hats on and look at the true inciting incident of the Crusades, the literal speech that sparked a fire across Europe. Look closely at this excerpt from Pope Urban II's speech in 1095. He stands up and starts by saying, "Brothers, I speak as a messenger from God." Boom. Immediately, he elevates his message. He's not just a guy giving advice, he's speaking for the Almighty. He claims that Christians in the East desperately need help, saying they are actively being attacked and killed. Notice how masterfully he uses fear right alongside a heavy sense of duty to completely hook his audience right out of the gate. And this next part brilliantly illustrates his core persuasive tactic. Just read that quote. "Let bandits become soldiers. Soldiers who have been fighting for money must now fight for heavenly riches." Wow. He is promising a total magical transformation. He's looking at criminals and hired mercenaries and telling them, hey, those violent skills of yours, you can now use them for a holy, righteous purpose. He is offering them a totally clean slate, cleverly blending earthly warfare with the ultimate divine reward. But it actually wasn't just about faith. Our source points out that the Pope used some seriously clever rhetoric aimed squarely at poor, hungry people. In the speech, he reminds them, very explicitly, your own land has too many people. There is not much wealth here. The soil hardly grows enough to support you. Basically, he was looking directly at a starving, desperate population and saying, I have the solution. Go to Jerusalem, take the land from the people there, and make it your own. So, let's look at how this builds into our revision strategy. When you're faced with a massively complex historical event like this, the absolute best thing you can do is categorize the chaos. Based on our source worksheet, we're going to use a rule of three framework. We can neatly sort all the reasons people went on crusades into three super easy to remember buckets: religion, money, and power. Let's dive into part three. Motivation 1, religious devotion. We'll pull apart that first and maybe the most obvious bucket. In a medieval society, faith wasn't just a Sunday thing. It was woven into absolutely every single aspect of daily life. So, our source grid gives us 4 massive religious factors. First up, your sins were completely forgiven by the church. If you happen to die on the journey or in battle, the Pope literally guaranteed you a fast-tracked place in heaven. Now, to a medieval person who was absolutely terrified of going to hell, this was an unbelievable, once-in-a-lifetime offer. On top of that, they wanted to ensure that Christians could safely go on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And finally, there's just simple obedience. The Pope was the head of the church. He told you to go, so you packed your bags and did what you were told. All right, part 4, motivation 2, seeking wealth. Because let's be real, human nature is rarely just about pure spiritual devotion, right? We have to look past the religion to uncover the real financial drivers in our second category. According to our analysis grid, cold hard cash was a huge motivator. Remember, the Pope himself had just reminded them that their own land at home was poor and practically barren. In stark contrast, the Holy Lands were famous for being incredibly rich and prosperous, and the primary source material makes no secret of this. Joining the crusade meant there would be tons of opportunities to steal money and treasure along the way. For a peasant with absolutely nothing to their name, this was incredibly dangerous, sure, but it was also a very tempting lottery ticket out of poverty. Moving to part 5, motivation 3, gaining power. This final category, it's not just about some loose coins in your pocket. This is about status, grabbing land, and entirely rewriting your reputation back in society. Our revision grid shows that fighting in these battles could earn you a seriously heroic reputation and deep, deep respect back home. But let's look at the practical side. Successful crusaders would be directly rewarded with lands and noble titles of their own. And our source notes how absolutely crucial this was for second sons. See, under medieval inheritance laws, the oldest son inherited the whole shebang. Everything. The second son, he got zilch, nothing. So the crusade offered these younger sons a rare, glittering chance to conquer and claim the land and the power that they were entirely locked out of back home. Finally, part 6, what was most significant? We've got the evidence, we've defined our categories, now it's time for the climactic evaluation phase. Because in year 8 history, just listing out facts isn't going to cut it. You actually have to judge the significance of these factors. So the crucial point here is taking this exact worksheet grid and making a firm decision. You need to color code these specific reasons and really weigh them against each other. Was it the Pope's grand promise of a guaranteed place in heaven that tipped the scales? Or was it the sheer desperation of terrible soil and the glittering lure of stolen treasure? Or maybe was it the ruthless ambition of landless second sons trying to build a heroic reputation? I want you to imagine filling in the bar chart on your worksheet right now. If you had to rate them from not that significant all the way up to the absolute most significant, what would your chart look like? Does religion tower over everything else because the Pope's authority was just that, absolute? Or do money and power creep up the chart, proving that medieval people were maybe driven by the exact same earthly desires for cash and status that drive people today? At the end of the day, history is all about making a strong argument backed up by solid evidence. So, here's your task. Swap your work with a classmate. Look back at the primary source evidence we just went through. The terrifying fear of hell, the tempting promise of new land, the harsh reality of starvation. If you had to stand in front of your class right now and confidently defend just one category as the ultimate reason people went on crusade, which one would it be? And exactly what piece of evidence from Pope Urban's speech proves that you are right? Have a real think about it. Good luck with the rest of your revision, and I'll catch you next time.